ladies, hello gentlemen. Welcome to this very special economic focus. Special because it is dedicated entirely to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, which this year 2018 is celebrating its 60th anniversary. It is an opportunity for us to return to the very foundation of this UN institution, its mission, but especially its record after 60 years of activities on the continent. To speak about it is my guest, the Director of the Central African Office of the ECA, Mr. Antonio Pedro. Thank you, Mr. Director, for granting us an interview.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. You are celebrating your 60th anniversary this year. From the onset, how did we get to the creation of the ECA?
Well, so let me first thank Vox Africa for giving us the opportunity again to talk about the work of ECA. As you know, by the time ECA was created in 1958, the continent was not liberated yet. There were very few independent countries. Yet the issues of promoting economic and social development were central to the aspirations of the continent. Hence, leaders like, for example, the Emperor of Ethiopia pushed for the establishment of the Economic Commission for Africa. Other regions had already similar institutions. So the Economic Commission for Africa was established in 1958 as the UN arm for the continent to help the emerging independent countries address their economic and social development issues by providing the necessary support in terms of policy advice, in terms of capacity building, even the establishment of the institutions that the continent required. ECA played a very important role in establishing what became later the Organization of African Unity, as the same applies to the African Development Bank and the ECOWAS, etc., etc. So it has been part and parcel of the newly independent Africa.
What is the method used by ECA? That is, what does the ECA has at its disposal to enforce its recommendations to the states or other actors?
Well, in general, ECA is both a think tank and a convener, and it utilizes those platforms to provide our member states with alternative thinking frameworks, development frameworks, with policy advice, with advisory services, with a view to addressing their respective development challenges and also helping them to harness the opportunities. ECA also brings its constituencies representing currently African member states, the regional economic communities, the African Union together to discussing issues of interest and then formulating common positions around those issues. We also, of course, provide the necessary support in terms of the advisory services, going to the ground, going to the terrain, and helping countries and regional economic communities formulate development policies and strategies. In addition, we provide capacity building. We have an institute in EDEP, which is called EDEP, Institute of Development Economic Planning, which is based in Dakar, which trains high-level policymakers on planning and other related economic and social issues. In addition, directly, the different divisions and offices provide support to our member states. I think as we are celebrating our 60th anniversary, let me perhaps offer just some insights about some of the important contributions of ECA to Africa's development thinking and practice. This goes from what we call the flagship reports. We produce on a regular basis the economic report on Africa that tracks economic and social development conditions on the continent. And since the early 2000s, these reports have focused on the issue of structural transformation. Basically, how to change the economies of the continent, which currently are essentially dominated by the agriculture sector, to economies where the manufacturing, the industrialization process play a much more important role. So we've been working on these particular topics since the 2000s, and so looking at different issues, for example, the role of commodities in structural transformation, the role of trade in industrializing, how to promote green industrialization, and so on and so forth. So those think pieces are very, very important because they offer guidance to our member states on how to utilize, for example, their resources to promote industrialization, how to benefit from trade to promote industrialization. In addition to that, we've also introduced a think piece, which is called Assessing Regional Integration Africa, or ARIA, which again tracks the progress of regional integration on the continent. And some of its initial pieces looked at the issue of rationalization of regional economic communities. Because as you know, many of our member states belong to 3 or 4 or 2 regional economic communities, which is costly. And in some cases, the existence of 2 regional economics in the same space, like for example in Central Africa, we have CEMAC and ECAs. This generates duplication of efforts. So we've produced an assessing regional integration report, which was focused on rationalization, which led to the reduction in the number of regional economic communities to the 8 officially recognized. Beyond that, we've contributed to the establishment of NEPAD. You would recall that the early 2000s and 1990s, President Mbeki of South Africa came with what we call MAP as a mechanism to advance development on the continent. Then we had other alternatives to President Mbeki's framework, which President Wadi came with. And so ECA played a facilitating role in bringing together all of those different pieces. And as a result, then the NEPAD was established in 2001. So the African peer review mechanism, again, was an initiative of the African leaders, heads of state and government, of which our organization played an important role, both in conducting the APRM reviews, as well as into the formulation of the so-called the national the national programs of action to support the implementation of the recommendations arising out of the country reviews. So I could continue, like for example, the formulation of African mining vision, the contributions to the formulation of the land policy initiative, which is a very important framework on how to improve the land development and reforms and cadastres around the continent. So our organization has been part and parcel of the emergence of Africa, and the most recently outcome of which was the signature in Kigali of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, if it's ratified by 22 countries, which we hope will happen soon, then we will have a market of 1.2 billion people. And this is an absolutely important milestone in the sense that we will have an access to a larger market, which will strengthen the business fundamentals of our projects, which will serve as in itself a factor to attract more investments to the continent. It could also contribute to raising the share of intra-African trade, which currently, unfortunately, is still below par if you compare to other regions. Africa's intra-African trade is about 13 to 16%, while regions like Europe are at 60% of inter-regional trade. So the African Continental Free Trade Area will become a vehicle to accelerating that the share of inter-regional trade.
So for 60 years, what would you say is your assessment of ECA's work? First, the main achievements, then the difficulties.
Well, I've already, of course, indicated to you a couple of the achievements. So contributing with knowledge, helping countries and regions in formulating their strategies. For example, ECA has played an important role in the ICT policy agenda, including in Rwanda, which again is currently the leader, I would say, on the continent in terms of ICT revolution. So we've contributed to the formulation of the national ICT policies for Rwanda, the first one, which is called NIKI 1, which was basically the policy framework. NIKI 2 was about the infrastructure development, and NIKI 3 was about content. And today, again, as I said, Rwanda is a leader in that area. We've also played an important role in helping regional economic communities formulating their own strategies. The most recent, for example, was SADC, in which our Office for Southern Africa has helped this organization formulate their regional industrialization strategy. So here in our sub-region, in Central Africa, our main focus is to support economic diversification. Ever since the fall of commodity prices in 2014, most of our countries have suffered macroeconomic instability, which led to the adoption of structural adjustment programs as a means to bringing those countries back to stability. Our perspectives are that indeed it's important to restore macroeconomic stability, but at the same time it's important to break these cycles, the so-called vicious circle in which these countries were sort of locked in because of their excessive dependence on the export of commodities. So this office has played a role in promoting the Made in Central Africa agenda, which led to the adoption of the Douala Consensus on economic diversification through resource-based and trade-induced industrialization. So we are supporting our sub-region in implementing the Douala Consensus. We are currently working in Chad to help them formulate their industrialization and economic diversification strategy. We'll be also soon working very, very closely with Cameroon to also looking at the same issues, economic diversification, and the same applies to Congo and Equatorial Guinea. So, but this is an agenda which requires long-term and sustained and continuous collaboration and investment, of course, under the leadership of our member states. We need to bring on board other development partners so that they can also direct their own investments into this major effort to diversify their economies. We need also to engage with institutions like the International Monetary Fund to secure the necessary fiscal and policy space, because structural adjustment means, in other words, that you have to impose yourself to a very serious fiscal financial discipline. It means reduce expenditures and target your investments very, very carefully so that they maximize the returns. And this is a conversation that we are and will be engaging with the IMF to understand what kind of margins our member states should explore or can explore with a view to balancing the need to restore macroeconomic stability with the long-term investments to enhance their productive capabilities, to diversify their economies, and to generate the growth that is required. And in our region, green growth is what is needed. So those are some of the challenges moving ahead in our sub-region. And we will be present to continue this collaboration with our member states. And of course, globally speaking, there is the issue of migration, which, as you know, we've seen quite a lot of our young people trying to cross the Mediterranean to go to Europe to work. Some of them don't reach there. It's a very sad sort of phenomenon. We are working through the Global Compact on Migration to try and understand better what are the vehicles to making migration work, so generating dividends out of migration, but also reducing the flows of migration by creating more employment on the continent. So there are opportunities to do that. There are the what's called post-Cotonou negotiations with the European Union. And the African Common Position on the post-Cotonou basically has put at the center of it the need to create jobs on the continent, amongst other things, of course. And creating jobs on the continent means we need to industrialize more. In our region means we need to diversify our countries more. Vertical diversification, which is within the same sector, to generate greater value addition, to go from the export of raw materials to having more manufactured products, and horizontal, that means to go beyond mono economies to having more sectors involved in the sector. So those are some of the things that for us are at the same time challenges and opportunities. We will continue to work with our member states as we celebrate the 60th anniversary. There is the big issue of the fourth industrial revolution, which offers challenges and opportunities. Challenges because the fourth industrial revolution comes with digital disruptions of the current economic systems. And those disruptions will impact on labor, on jobs. In some sectors, because of the automation of production systems, we'll have less and less jobs. What would that imply for a continent where we need to create more and more jobs for the young people that we have? And you know the projections say that by 2050 we'll have 2.5 billion people, so double of what we have now. So creating jobs is a serious challenge. And this challenge becomes aggravated when you have digital disruptions, automation, the miniaturization of economic production systems that will mean that less and less people will be required to generate the same output currently. So this is a major challenge. We will be going next year to Equatorial Guinea, to Malabo, to discuss through our major platform, which is our Intergovernmental Committee of Experts, which is our policy organ, which is our statutory organ, to discuss digital transformations and economic diversification, issues, challenges, and opportunities. This is an opportunity to ask whether our countries in Central Africa are prepared to make the most of the fourth industrial revolution, whether their existing policy instruments, visions and strategies are well crafted to make the most of the digital transformation.
The ECA is engaged in a vast project, that of the establishment of a free trade zone on the continent. Firstly, what will this imply?
Well, it will imply a larger market. We will move from a balkanized continent with different preferential trade regimes, with immense tariff and non-tariff barriers, which makes it very, very costly to do business and trade on the continent, to an integrated market of 1.2 billion people now and 2.5 billion people in 2050 or so. So this is very important again, because if the trade, the tariff and non-tariff barriers are removed, then trade will happen seamless. There is some trade already happening, both formal and informal. In our borders, there is cross-border trade which is not registered. And it's not registered because there are many obstacles to doing trade. So if those obstacles are removed, we believe that even the informal traders, our women that go through serious challenges to do trade will be able to move much more freely across our borders. So it is a very, very important milestone. It's a very important development. And at this stage, as we celebrate our 60th anniversary, we appeal to our member states to accelerate the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area, so that come 2019, we now start working on the operationalization of the Continental Free Trade Area. We start working with our member states to identify what are the particular products that they would like to utilize as a basis to industrialize, the so-called the 10% sensitive projects, and helping them formulate their national African Continental Free Trade Area strategies. In this region, we'll be working with Cameroon and Chad to formulate their strategies. So basically, identifying first what are their comparative advantages, and then around those comparative advantages, develop strategies to deepen the level of value addition, so that the trade in manufactured goods in this region improves. So that is a very important agenda for us and for the entire continent. The African Union is mobilizing the entire Africa with a view to making this a reality.
Finally, let's go back to ECA's 60th anniversary celebration.
Yes.
What are the main challenges facing the institution today, and what are the priority areas for its collaboration with its member states, especially those in Central Africa?
Well, as you know, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has initiated a vast reform program of the UN system in general. We are part of the so-called UN development system, but the Secretary General's agenda is focused on a couple of, let's say, pillars. One is to ensure that UN work on the humanitarian, peace and security, and development pillars are part and parcel of one single and continued, let's say, package. So we need, as ECA, to articulate how can we fit into that new institutional arrangement. How can we better integrate our peace, our work on development and economic and social development within this larger prism of reducing the pockets of conflict, sustaining peace where it is, generating greater inclusion, social inclusion, etc., etc. So that's one part of the challenge moving forward. The other package of the Secretary General's reform is to ensure that we reduce fragmentation in the UN family, meaning that all the different agencies, and there are many, work together better. In our particular group of work, which is the development pillar, We need to ensure that our work with agencies like the UNDP, ILO, the FAO is much better integrated, so that we reduce duplication, we maximize our contributions and towards greater development impact. So this is a challenge, but it's equally an important opportunity for us to work better. At the end, we all and our member states are looking to UN, which is much more flexible, which responds better to their needs and their aspirations, and that does that in a very cost-effective way. So this is the package, and this is something that we are preparing ourselves towards. We have a relatively new executive secretary of ECA, Madame Vera Songwe, who's a Cameroonian, who has also instituted a reform package in response to the development challenges that the continent is confronted with, but equally so in response to the Secretary General's own reform package. So we are operationalizing that agenda, which includes, for example, how to harness better the strength and the power of the private sector to respond to the development challenge of the continent. So this is looking within the UN. But we, of course, are here to serve our member states and their organs, like the African Union and the regional economic communities. And as I said earlier, in Central Africa, I think there is a consensus, both at the highest possible leadership level and at the more operational level, that economic diversification is a must. So we are, as an organization, as a regional office for Africa, I would say in the right track by prioritizing our work on economic diversification. So the challenge for us is to become more competent in this area. We have developed our own theory of change on economic diversification, which is guiding us in building that center of excellence on economic diversification, so that we provide our member state with world-class services on everything to do with economic diversification, from policies to design of strategies to helping countries strengthen their capacities, to helping them engaging with other development partners, including the IMFs in this world, in the negotiations of Article 4 sort of issues, and so on and so forth. So this is our goal forward, to become a center of excellence on economic diversification and being the office of reference on anything to do with economic diversification in this region.
We have come to the end of this edition of Focus Special ECA. Thank you, Mr. Director, for answering our questions. Thank you, viewers at home, for joining us. I'll meet you next week on the same channel, Vox Africa. Till then, take care.